What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors finds himself face to face with a host who's clearly done zero research and seems more interested in stirring up controversy than having a real conversation? Well, you're about to witness something absolutely wild that had the entire Late Show audience sitting in stunned silence. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because this story is going to leave you speechless. Trust me, you've never seen anything like what went down between these two. So there's Denzel Washington, sitting across from Stephen Colbert on what was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his latest film. The cameras are rolling, the audience is excited, and everything seems perfectly normal. But within minutes, the entire atmosphere in that studio shifted dramatically. Stephen leans back in his chair with that familiar smirk and says, "So Denzel, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me. You've made a career playing these, let's call them, morally complex characters. Some might say you're always playing the same angry black man stereotype." The studio goes dead quiet. You can literally hear people in the audience shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Denzel's expression doesn't change immediately, but there's something in his eyes that anyone paying attention would recognize as a warning sign. "Excuse me?" Denzel responds, his voice calm but with an edge that cuts through the silence like a blade. Stephen, apparently oblivious to the danger he's just walked into, doubles down. "Well, I mean, look at your filmography. Training Day, Man on Fire, The Equalizer series. It's like you've cornered the market on playing tough guys with anger issues. Don't you think that sends a certain message?" The camera catches Denzel's jaw tightening slightly, but his voice remains controlled. "Stephen, I think you might want to be more careful with your words here." "Oh, come on," Stephen says with a dismissive wave. "We're all adults here. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You've got to admit, there's a pattern." "A pattern," Denzel repeats slowly, and anyone who knows anything about reading people can see the storm building behind his eyes. Stephen, still completely missing the signals, pushes forward. "Look, I'm not trying to be controversial here, but when you look at the roles you choose versus, say, someone like Tom Hanks or Kevin Costner, there's a clear difference in the types of characters being portrayed. The comparison to white actors hits different, and you can see Denzel's posture change. He sits up straighter, his hands clasped together in front of him, and when he speaks, every word is measured and deliberate. "Stephen, let me ask you something. When you watched Fences, what did you see? When you watched Flight, what did you take away from that? When you watched He Got Game or Malcolm X, were you seeing angry black men, or were you seeing complex human beings dealing with real situations?" Stephen, incredibly, seems to interpret this as an opening for more provocation. "Well, sure, but even in those films, there's this underlying anger, this chip-on-the-shoulder mentality that seems to define your characters." The audience is now visibly uncomfortable. People are looking at each other with expressions that clearly say they can't believe what they're hearing. But Denzel, instead of exploding, does something even more powerful. He goes completely still. "A chip on my shoulder," he repeats quietly, and the way he says it makes the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. "I mean, you have to see it from the outside perspective," Stephen continues, apparently determined to dig this hole as deep as possible. "Your characters are always fighting some system, always angry about something, always looking for a reason to be upset. Fighting some system," Denzel says. And now there's something in his voice that makes everyone in that studio realize they're witnessing something unprecedented. "Stephen," Denzel continues, his voice still controlled, but with an intensity that's absolutely captivating. "Let me help you understand something. When I played Reuben Carter in The Hurricane, was I portraying an angry black man, or was I portraying a man who was wrongly imprisoned for crimes he didn't commit? When I played Malcolm X, was I showing you a man with a chip on his shoulder, or was I showing you someone who fought for justice and equality?" Stephen, finally seeming to realize he might have stepped too far, tries to backtrack. "Well, of course. Those are important stories." No, Denzel interrupts, and it's the first time his voice has risen above that deadly calm tone. "You don't get to qualify this now. You want to talk about patterns? Let's talk about patterns." The studio is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the cameramen seem frozen, unsure whether to keep filming or stop. But they keep rolling because they know they're capturing something that will be talked about for years. Denzel leans forward in his chair, his eyes locked on Steven with an intensity that's making everyone in the studio hold their breath. You want to talk about patterns, Steven? Let's examine the pattern of questions you're asking me compared to the questions you ask other actors. Steven tries to maintain his composure, but you can see he's starting to sweat. Denzel, I think you're reading too much into this. Am I? Denzel cuts him off sharply. When Robert De Niro comes on this show to talk about playing a gangster for the 100th time, do you ask him if he's perpetuating Italian stereotypes? When Liam Neeson promotes another action movie where he's seeking revenge, do you question whether he's always playing the same angry character? The audience is completely silent now, and you can see some people in the front row leaning forward, fully absorbed in what's happening. Steven opens his mouth to respond, but Denzel isn't finished. When Christian Bale transforms his entire body and mind for a role, you call it dedication. When I do the same thing, you call it having a chip on my shoulder. When Tom Cruise does his own stunts and commits completely to an action role, you call it professional. When I bring that same intensity to my work, suddenly I'm just playing the angry black man. Steven's face is flushed now, and he's clearly struggling to regain control of his own show. Now hold on. That's not what I said. That's exactly what you said, Denzel fires back, his voice rising for the first time. You sat there and told me I'm always playing the same angry black man stereotype. You compared my body of work to actors who've never had to fight for the kinds of roles I've had to fight for, who've never had to prove themselves the way I've had to prove myself. The tension in the studio is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Steven tries desperately to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Look, I think we're getting off track here. I was simply trying to discuss your artistic choices. My artistic choices? Denzel's laugh is sharp and humorless. Steven, do you know what my artistic choice was when I decided to direct and star in Fences? It was to bring August Wilson's Pulitzer Prize-winning play to the screen because Hollywood wasn't interested in telling that story. Do you know what my artistic choice was when I took on Malcolm X? It was to spend a year of my life becoming that man because Spike Lee and I knew that story needed to be told right. Steven is visibly uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat and looking toward his producers off camera, as if hoping someone will throw him a lifeline. Of course. Those are incredible achievements. Don't patronize me. Denzel snaps, and the power in his voice makes several audience members actually jump in their seats. You don't get to diminish my work for 10 minutes, and then try to smooth it over with empty compliments. The camera catches Steven wiping sweat from his forehead as he attempts another approach. Denzel, I think you're misinterpreting my questions. I have enormous respect for your work. If you had enormous respect for my work, Denzel interrupts, his voice now filled with controlled fury. You wouldn't have spent the first half of this interview trying to reduce 40 years of my career to a stereotype. You wouldn't have suggested that I'm somehow limited as an actor because I've chosen to tell stories about complex black men facing real challenges. Steven makes one more desperate attempt to salvage the situation. I think we may have gotten our wires crossed here. Maybe we should talk about your new film. No, Steven. We're going to finish this conversation, Denzel says, and his tone makes it clear this isn't a request. You started this line of questioning, and now you're going to hear what I have to say about it. The studio audience is completely transfixed. Some people have their phones out, clearly recording what they know is going to be one of the most talked about television moments in recent memory. The producers are probably having heart attacks, but the cameras keep rolling. You want to know about patterns? Denzel continues, his voice building in intensity. Here's a pattern for you. I've been nominated for 9 Academy Awards. I've won 2. I've been nominated for Tony Awards, Golden Globes, SAG Awards, NAACP Image Awards. I've been honored by the American Film Institute, the Kennedy Center, and received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But you want to sit there and reduce all of that to me, playing angry black men? Steven's face has gone pale, and he's clearly realizing just how badly he's miscalculated this entire exchange. Denzel, I never meant to suggest. What did you mean to suggest? Denzel demands. And now he's not just angry, he's disappointed, which somehow feels even more devastating. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you did exactly zero preparation for this interview beyond looking at some movie posters and making assumptions. The audience is so quiet that the hum of the studio lights is audible. Steven looks like he wants to disappear into his chair, but Denzel isn't done with him yet. The silence in the studio stretches for what feels like an eternity before Denzel speaks again, and when he does, his voice carries a weight that makes everyone understand they're witnessing something historic. You know what, Steven? I'm going to help you out here because clearly you need it. You want to understand my artistic choices? Let me educate you about what it means to be a black actor in Hollywood. Steven looks like he's about to interrupt, but Denzel holds up a hand that stops him cold. When I started my career, do you know how many leading roles were available to actors who looked like me? Do you know how many scripts came across my agent's desk that didn't require me to play a drug dealer, a pimp, or a criminal? Let me give you a number, Steven. Almost none. The camera pans across the audience, and you can see people hanging on every word. Some are nodding, others look shocked, but everyone is completely absorbed. So when I had the opportunity to play complex characters with depth and substance, characters who happened to be fighting against real injustices, I took those roles. Not because I wanted to play angry black men, but because those were the stories worth telling. Those were the characters who had something to say. Steven finally finds his voice, though it comes out weaker than before. I can appreciate that, but surely you can see how some people might interpret. Some people might interpret? Denzel's voice rises sharply, and for the first time, he looks truly angry. Steven, are you really going to sit there and tell me that my problem is how some people interpret my work? Are you seriously suggesting that I should have chosen my roles based on what would make certain audiences more comfortable? The studio audience is completely silent, but you can feel the energy in the room shifting. People are starting to realize they're watching Stephen Colbert get absolutely dismantled by one of the greatest actors of all time. That's not what I meant, Stephen protests, but his voice lacks any conviction. Then what did you mean? Denzel demands, leaning forward in his chair. Because right now, it sounds like you're suggesting that I should have turned down roles in films like Training Day, a movie that earned me an Academy Award, because it might make some people uncomfortable. It sounds like you think I should have passed on directing Fences because it shows a black family dealing with real struggles. Stephen tries desperately to regain some footing. I think you're putting words in my mouth. I'm using your words, Stephen. Denzel fires back immediately. You said I always play angry black men with chips on their shoulders. You said there's a pattern in my work that sends a certain message. Those are your words, not mine. The host is visibly sweating now, and you can see him glancing toward the side of the stage where his producers are probably frantically trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. Look, Stephen says, his voice getting more desperate. I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Maybe we should. No, Stephen, we're not moving on. We're going to finish this. Denzel interrupts, and his tone makes it clear he's not backing down. You started this conversation by questioning my artistic integrity, by reducing 4 decades of my work to a stereotype, and now you want to just move on like nothing happened? The audience is so transfixed that several people have forgotten they're supposed to be quiet during tapings. You can hear whispers of disbelief and a few gasps as Denzel continues. Let me tell you something about those characters you want to dismiss as angry stereotypes. Denzel continues, his voice building in power. Alonzo in Training Day wasn't just an angry black man. He was a corrupt cop who had lost his way, a man whose noble intentions had been twisted by a broken system. That character was a commentary on police corruption and the thin line between justice and vengeance. Stephen opens his mouth to respond, but Denzel isn't finished. Creasy in Man on Fire wasn't just an angry man seeking revenge. He was a broken soldier dealing with PTSD, a man who found redemption through protecting an innocent child. That film was about healing, about finding purpose when you think your life is over. The passion in Denzel's voice is absolutely captivating. Even the camera operators seem mesmerized by what they're witnessing. Malcolm X wasn't an angry black man, Stephen. He was a revolutionary, a man who transformed himself from a street hustler into one of the most important civil rights leaders in American history. That film took me a year to prepare for because I understood the responsibility of bringing that man's story to life. Stephen is now looking around desperately, clearly hoping someone will help him out of this situation, but nobody is coming to his rescue. And Robert McCall in The Equalizer? Denzel continues, his voice dripping with controlled fury. He's a man who uses his skills to help people who can't help themselves, who fights against injustice wherever he finds it. But I guess in your mind, that makes him just another angry black man with a chip on his shoulder. The studio is so quiet you could hear a heartbeat. Steven looks like he's aged 10 years in the past few minutes. Steven, Denzel says, his voice becoming dangerously quiet again. Do you know what's really disappointing about this whole conversation? It's not that you ask stupid questions. Hosts ask stupid questions all the time. What's disappointing is that you had an opportunity to have a real conversation about craft, about storytelling, about the responsibility that comes with being an actor, and instead you chose to reduce everything I've worked for to a racial stereotype. Steven's face has gone from pale to red, and he's clearly struggling to find any way to respond that won't make things worse. You had Denzel Washington sitting across from you. Denzel continues. And the way he refers to himself in the third person somehow makes his words even more powerful. And the best you could come up with was to suggest that he's been playing the same character his entire career. Do you have any idea how ignorant that makes you sound? The audience is completely mesmerized. Some people are filming with their phones, despite probably being told not to, because they know they're witnessing television history. I've spent 40 years in this business perfecting my craft, Denzel continues, his voice rising again. I've studied under Lloyd Richards at Yale. I've worked with the best directors in the world. I've transformed myself physically and mentally for roles that required everything I had to give. And you want to sit there and tell me it's all the same character? Steven makes one final, desperate attempt to salvage something from this disaster. Denzel, I have enormous respect for your talent. Stop, Denzel says firmly, holding up his hand. Just stop. Don't sit there and try to flatter me now after spending this entire interview disrespecting my life's work. If you had enormous respect for my talent, you would have done your homework. You would have asked thoughtful questions about my process, about the choices I make as an artist, about what drives me to tell the stories I tell. The power in Denzel's voice is absolutely mesmerizing. You can see audience members leaning forward, completely absorbed in every word. Instead, Denzel continues, you chose to perpetuate the exact kind of thinking that makes it harder for black actors to get complex, meaningful roles. You chose to see my work through the lens of stereotypes instead of seeing it for what it actually is, which is the result of decades of dedication to my craft. Steven looks like he wants to disappear entirely, and honestly, you can't blame him. He's just been systematically taken apart by one of the most respected actors in Hollywood. So here's what's going to happen, Steven, Denzel says, standing up from his chair. The entire studio gasps as they realize he's about to walk off the show. You're going to think very carefully about this conversation. You're going to consider whether the questions you ask and the assumptions you make are coming from a place of genuine curiosity or from unconscious bias. The camera follows Denzel as he removes his microphone, his movements deliberate and controlled. Steven is frozen in his chair, clearly having no idea how to handle what's happening. And maybe, Denzel continues, looking directly into the camera instead of at Steven. The next time you have the privilege of interviewing someone who has dedicated their life to their craft, you'll approach that conversation with the respect and preparation it deserves. The studio erupts in spontaneous applause as Denzel walks toward the exit, leaving Steven sitting alone at his desk looking absolutely shell-shocked. The cameras keep rolling as the audience gives Denzel a standing ovation, and you can see people wiping tears from their eyes. That's how you stand up for yourself and your art. That's how you handle disrespect with dignity and power. Make sure you subscribe and comment below with your thoughts, because this is a moment that's going to be talked about for years to come. What do you think was the most powerful part of Denzel's response to Steven's questions?